Hello and welcome. We are going to be talking about a subject that I kind of debated. It's like, I don't know, do we really need to talk about this? However, I think it still is an important topic. So, what we're going to be doing today is discussing, and I want you also chiming in with your thoughts about the why behind identity first language and people first language and understanding the difference between those. So, if you are here with us live, say hi. If you've been around for a while, you might recognize this poster. It was in schoolrooms, it was in conference rooms where IEP meetings were held. And it was a very popular poster back in the 80s. And it says, label jars, not people. Who remembers this? Is this anything that looks familiar looks familiar to you? Let me know. The thing is that we have to recognize is that people first language is not the only way to speak, right? The problem is you, me, we do what we've been taught, right? The mistake is we don't take the time to understand the why of both identity first and people first language. The wonderful outcome and benefit of using language that the person themselves prefers is that we more fully understand each other. And it's not this matter of political correctness, but we really understand the reason behind the person is choosing the language that they are. And this isn't going to be the right place for you today if you don't see a need to help more people understand the reasons why people prefer identity first language or people first language. It's not going to be the right place for you today if you don't see a need to be able to help like friends, colleagues, family members to understand why people prefer different kinds of language. Now, we said one of the big problems is we do what we've been taught, right? So we've been taught in order to show respect for people, we should use people first language. Now, you know, this goes back into the 1980s. So this is something that some of us have been taught and, used for a number of years, right? We've also been taught to be empathetic, and we certainly don't want it to become pity, right? That we show respect, we show understanding, we're empathetic by using people first language. And what we've been taught is we don't say autistic person, we say a person with autism. Now, we know better. We know that people first language is not the only way we can speak. But when we go back to those vintage 80 times, I see Rochelle's here. Rochelle, do you remember the 80s? We did, with that people first language, it was like, these are examples like, oh, the young boy with Down syndrome, or the person with autism, or the girl with a hearing impairment. And guess what? People have now realized that deaf people do not see deafness as a disability. They see it as a medical condition and part of their identity that they're proud of. So the deaf community does not prefer, generally, PeopleFirst Language. The National Federation of Blind in 1993 had a resolution opposing PeopleFirst Language. And the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network, here is a quote from their website, and it says, the autism community, many self-advocates and their allies prefer terminologies such as autistic, autistic person, or autistic individual, because we understand autism as an inherent part of each person's identity. So this helps us, I think, get a better understanding that not everyone prefers PeopleFirst Language, and so we need to be respectful of that. Now, if you're stuck in that PeopleFirst Language, you might feel confused when you hear somebody say, no, please call me an autistic student. And that doesn't convert to your teaching of PeopleFirst Language. And you may have been on the language patrol. I was on the language patrol, and I still am in different ways. But who knows what the language patrol is? The language patrol is when you do things like constantly correct people. So if we go back to the 80s and the 90s, I was learning to use PeopleFirst Language. So if people said something, about Dylan, oh, he's that Downs kid, like immediately this red flag would go up, and I'd be like, actually, he's a boy with Down syndrome, and I would correct them. With family members, I made sure that they were taught also to use PeopleFirst Language. So if they heard a friend talking about a classmate as the CP kid, my kids were on the language patrol too, and they would ask people to use, no, actually, he's a kid that has cerebral palsy. And I mean, I did this kind of relentlessly in the building where I taught, at district meetings, during IEP meetings. I would remind people to use PeopleFirst Language, at conferences, like even in the grocery store. So who else here? Anybody claim being on the language patrol? And now we know there's other language we can use besides PeopleFirst Language, right? And what I've noticed sometimes with having conversations with friends is like they've heard of IdentityFirst Language, but it's like still it's like, what? It kind of doesn't compute. So what I want to do today is, by the end of the webinar, make sure that, if you kind of struggle with, how do I explain what IdentityFirst Language is, or how do I explain PeopleFirst Language? That's what you'll be getting today, is some clarification so we can be respectful. So we talked about the problem and the mistakes, and one of those big things is we're doing what we've been taught. Some of us aren't aware that language has evolved. And I think back to the times where, as far as, for people with intellectual disabilities. And if you go back in time, I mean, moron, idiot, those were words that were used a lot, right? Retarded, right? stop saying the R word. When I graduated from college, my special ed endorsements were with trainable mentally retarded and educably mentally retarded. So those were my endorsements. Those were the students that I could go out in the world and teach. So you look, yeah, our language has evolved. We no longer use those terms like idiot, moron, retarded. Now it's intellectually disabled, right? Or have a intellectual disability or a cognitive disability. And what we're now looking at is, for some people, that language needs to evolve. So instead of saying a person with autism, we need to learn that for a lot of people, they would prefer the identity first language. So is this making sense? So we have to be aware that language has evolved. And sometimes we don't understand why the change is even needed. It's like, what? I don't get it. And I think at the bottom of this, a lot of times it's we struggle with like, what? Like somebody is like really proud of their disability and somebody really wants their disability to be known as such an important part of their identity. And that can be a foreign concept. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at some words of people and hope that you will get that clarification, because this is something I think is really important in our conversations. So you guys are quiet in the comments. Let us know what you're thinking. Have you been taught to use pretty much always person-centered thinking? Let us know. The other thing I think that would be interesting is, one, does this sound familiar to you? And two, what does your child prefer? Or if you're a teacher with this, what do some of your students prefer as far as people first or identity first? I'm curious. So if you want to put that in the comments, that would be good. So let's look at, if I can show my screen again, let's look at the why behind identity language, or you might be really familiar with the quote, nothing about us without us. And this is like something that is really important, I think, for all of us to understand. And Rochelle says that she hadn't always been taught to use PeopleFirst language, grew up just treating people with kindness. See the human. Hey, Trisha. Trisha says, I am diabetic. It is part and parcel of my being. But when I think of my child, I say Cash is a child with autism. Yeah, and there are people that are autistic that do prefer PeopleFirst language. And so that's why we can't generalize that, like, oh, all people with autism want to be using PeopleFirst language, or all autistic people want to be using identity language. And I think when our kids are young, it becomes like our parent preference, right? And then I wonder, like, when our kids start understanding a little bit more about their disability, which I mean really happens in elementary school, I wonder, like, how could we give kids choices, or how could we explain, or I wonder. what would that look like? I'm curious. So Cass says, I am autistic and have 2 autistic daughters. For us, we use Identity First Language because being autistic is literally what makes us who we are. It's our brains. Yeah. And I think that's really important, Cass. So thank you for being here. Because we don't want to be speaking for others, right? Nothing about us without us. So I appreciate you being here. Yeah, and I think that's the thing. It's like that claim of my neurodiversity is like pretty cool, and that makes me who I am. So I'm going to claim that. Um, so yeah, I think that's the difference that we want people to understand. Um, so Cass, what do you think about as far as so your daughters are growing up with Identity First Language? And then, I mean, do you ever talk? I don't know how old your kids are. Do you ever talk about like People First Language, or if they hear somebody using People First Language, does that like perk their ears? And I mean, is that odd for them to hear that? Um, so yeah, I'm just curious. Trisha says, I'm waiting for my child to self identify. I will respect what they choose. Yeah. And I just wonder what that conversation is like. Um, I mean, yeah. So let me go here to Rochelle's comment. Thanks for your interaction. And she says, Charmaine, you posted an animated drawing of folks talking about a student in a wheelchair, and they were debating what to call him. The student pipes up, call me John. Oh, I know. And you're taking away my punchline at the end, Rochelle. But yeah, it's like when in doubt, use their name. I remember going to lots of different conferences, and they would have you like, when you registered, what's your child's name, how old your child is, what's your child, I don't know, how did they say it? Anyway, it was like, what's the disability category? And, it was like, no, just call him Dylan. That's fine. Um, and there are times though, where you do want to be able to know what that preference is, right? Um, so Cass says the vast, yes, majority of autistic people prefer Identity First per every single poll out there. Due to that, default should be okay, Identity First Language for autistic people. Of course, we should respect an individual if they use person first language for themselves. Yeah, and I was looking at some websites last night, so I want to show you in a bit here some slides of what I saw. So it was interesting. Rochelle says, if it's positive, then labels might be okay. If it's okay with that person. If it's negative, then no. Yeah, and I think that's the thing as far as you know, I don't know, kind of eye of the beholder, but it's more eye of the person. And yeah, and I think what it is, and Cass, pipe in here. I think what it is, there is that sense like, we want to stop having disability seen as something that's negative. And instead, we want to say, yeah, this is who I am. And that disability is part of who I am. So I think that's what we're looking at as far as people claiming neurodiversity is a gift. It's their strengths, it's their talents. So that's why they want to, lead with Identity First Language. Um, So Cass says her daughters are 6 and 3. We're raising them with autistic pride because self-esteem and pride in oneself are protective factors against mental health struggles. Yeah. We celebrate Autistic Pride Day by doing something special related to our deep interests, for instance. Yes. And that's, I mean, the other huge, problem is when people feel like they have to mask and they have to um, hide those neurodiverse traits that they have in order to be accepted. And that's where I think, Cass, you're talking about those mental health struggles. Yeah, it makes a huge difference. Tiffany, hey, Tiffany. Tiffany's in Idaho, and she said, Rochelle, yeah, but who gets to decide if it's positive? Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, right? And I think, generally, the community that still prefers PeopleFirst Language are people with intellectual disabilities. And I use PeopleFirst Language for Dylan. That's something that, he grew up with, but also that's a choice of his as an adult. And so, yeah, so you look at deaf people, blind people, and autistic people, and the sense of pride that they have. And that's why I think identity language is like really important. And then you look at people with intellectual disabilities, and there's not that deep sense of pride of, I have an intellectual disability. So yeah, it's all so interesting. Cass says, as to if they'd be confused by PeopleFirst Language, honestly, I don't think so. It's not like they've never heard the word autism. Yeah, and I just wonder, like, I think for a lot of people that have used PeopleFirst Language, when we first started hearing Identity First Language, it was like, oh, what? So yeah, I just wonder if it, if kids notice that difference. Rochelle says, in part what Charmaine is saying here, celebrate the good things, stop the negative, kindly educate those who continue to marginalize our people. Yeah. Oh, Trisha, yeah, I want to see this. She said, I just watched a webinar titled Super Neurodivergence, the Superpower of Neurodiversity and How to Support Others. And I don't know, Trisha, if you've gotten the link for the replay yet. But if maybe later today, if you have a replay link, if you could come back and post that in the comments, because I think people would, I think those kind of informational videos are so important and such a good way for us to learn. And Cass says, for me, it's not about thinking being autistic is always positive. It's about it being inseparable for who I am. Fundamentally, it is in my brain. So thank you. Thank you. Yeah, that's a good clarification, Because I've also heard parents talk about, their autistic children, and yeah, they, not everything is hunky-dory all the time. So I guess, so I appreciate that, Cass, because it's like, yes, you can see neurodiversity as a positive, as a strength. But when you're looking at yourself as a person and your identity, autism is, like you said, embedded, right? But yeah, it doesn't have to always be. So I think that's maybe a good way to look at it. It doesn't always have to be positive in order for someone to claim identity first. So thank you. That's a good clarification for me. Yeah, and Trisha's thanking you for your lived experience. She said that she's waiting on the replay link, that she learned so much. Okay, so thank you. See, I keep learning. Thank you for being here, Cass. You're my teacher. It's not in my brain. It is my brain. So thank you. That's a wonderful distinction, right? So autism is not in a brain. Autism is the brain. So thank you. Thank you. Yeah, so I appreciate you guys being here because, like I said, I learn, right? And it's important for me to learn that. I was going to show you a couple slides here. So let me see where we are. And this is a slide from back in the 80s. Kathy Snow, who is one of my good friends. So this is what Kathy wrote back in the 80s about using PeopleFirst Language. She says using PeopleFirst Language is putting the person before the disability and eliminating old prejudicial and hurtful descriptions, and that can move us in a new direction. It can change the way we see a person. It can change the way a person sees herself. So, you know, this is something that is still, obviously people are still using PeopleFirst Language. And so, you know, I think for some people that may have grown up using IdentityFirst Language, it's equally important for them to understand people that use PeopleFirst Language, right? We all want to be understanding of each other. So the other thing is, and this you probably know, is both the National Down Syndrome Congress, the National Down Syndrome Society, prefer PeopleFirst Language. They see the person first and that their disability is just a secondary attribute. And IdentityFirst Language, I'm going to skip through some of these, but this is a quote from Lydia Brown. And she said, in the autism community, many self-advocates and their allies prefer the terminology such as autistic, autistic person, or autistic individual, because we understand autism as an inherent part of an individual's identity. And so what we see too is we don't want disabilities to be necessarily seen as inherently negative, bad, or undesirable. Now, the thing that I found interesting was when I was on the Autism Society's website last night. Look at the language I found. So it says the Autism Society strives to empower individuals with autism and their families to make informed, and then it went on. So here they're using PeopleFirst Language, and I don't think I ever understood that the Autism Society was a proponent of PeopleFirst. And then look at this other example. It says the board of directors of the Autism Society affirms that each person who experiences autism is a unique individual. And then they go on. And I have heard people, it's usually, I think, been parents that say my son experiences autism. And I thought that was like an interesting way, kind of a twist on PeopleFirst Language. I mean, it's still PeopleFirst based, And, the Autism Society is a very large organization, and it's like curious to me why they don't, why they aren't proponents of identity first. So, Cass, I don't know if you have any information that you could shine. So Tiffany, hey Tiffany, she said, I'm so glad to see this conversation here. I've seen so many parents really dig their heels in over this issue, not wanting to say autistic. We used to say has autism around here, but switched to autistic probably 6 or 7 years ago. For us, it's a no-brainer because the vast majority of autistics prefer it. For this reason, why wouldn't we adopt identity first language? Yeah, thanks, Tiffany. And her son is older. And so, yeah, that's interesting to look at the time frame of, changing from using people first to identity first. Yeah, and I think, if you're kind of, wondering and you're confused about, what the person prefers, you can go with the default. If they have an intellectual disability, they probably prefer people first. You can say, well, if they're deaf, blind, or autistic, they probably will use identity first. However, if you don't know, you can just ask. You can say, I want to be respectful. Do you prefer person first or identity first language? So, I think that's, a practice that we can use. So Trisha's saying, learning that my son's intellectual disability is his brain will also help me support him through his lifespan and supported decision making. Yeah, it's so interesting. Thank you. Thank you. Cass says, I've got two autistic young kids, laugh out loud. I definitely know it's not all easy and positive, but embracing ourselves as who we are fundamentally, that allows us to focus on strengthening what we need to strengthen without the shame. Yeah, and I think that's probably such another aspect of the language that we use. And if people feel shame for their disability, yeah. And that's like where that masking, I think, can come from, right? That they feel shameful and they have to change how they behave and think and do when they're around other people. So, yeah. And Trisha said, I learned to use differently abled. Yeah. And I mean, that's the thing, right? Some people like that. Some people, don't. I mean, and definitely ask and show respect, Yeah. And Tiffany reminds us disability is not a dirty word. Yeah. And that's part of that cultural shift that we need to make because, we're a select group of people here live, but the vast majority of people don't see disability as a gift or as a strength. Oh, yeah. Cass says this is indicative of why Autism Society is not an organization most autistic adults support. Yeah, and it's just interesting, and so I think probably, the Autism Society must attract more maybe young families who don't want to say their child is autistic or don't understand how that's the person they are. Huh. Yeah, well, and I know Autism Speaks is another organization that adults with, autistic adults aren't, a fan of. And so when I looked at the Autism Society, I was thinking, oh, well, this isn't Autism Speaks. This is, yeah. So it surprised me. I didn't realize that about the Autism Society. And I keep putting my glasses away. Tiffany says, to see that on the Autism Society website is unfortunate in her humble opinion. Yeah, it was kind of intriguing. So Trisha says, who should I follow to be informed? It's it's the person, right? I mean, I don't know. Cass has an answer here. She said, truly, my go tos are the Autistic Self Advocacy Network and Autistic Women and Non Binary Network, along with accounts like Neuroclastic. Cool. Yeah. And I thought I had a slide from the Autistic Self Advocacy Network. I hadn't heard of the Autistic Women and Non Binary Network or Neuroclastic. So thank you. Thank you. You are our teacher today, Cass. Yeah. Autistic people, right? Whoever the person is. Trisha says, I have a niece who's delightful and an adult autistic friend. I need to ask them more. Yeah. And Rochelle says that disability is a taboo subject in many cultures. Yeah, and that is interesting to see like our Western culture versus other cultures in the world. Yeah. Cash says, if y'all don't follow Neuro Wild, you should. Autistic, ADHD, a speech language pathologist with amazing resources for parents and educators. Good, good, good. And I'll be putting a list of these new resources to me in my newsletter. So if you don't get my weekly newsletter, usually we have it go out on Tuesdays. You can sign up at iep.today/weekly-adv-tips. And Cass, I appreciate. And if others, keep your comments coming. If you have additional websites or resources, let us know because I'll be compiling that into the weekly newsletter. Anything else for the good of the people here? Let me see if there's any. So, what do you think? And is this a conversation that comes up much? Or I don't know. I'm just wondering like how it takes us a long time to change habits and the ways of doing things. And so I wonder if we've kind of gone over that cusp of more people using identity first language, or if we're not quite there yet. Oh, good. Thanks. Tiffany gave a link. Yeah, this is Greg, the occupational therapist. He is like amazing. And I don't know if it was over the weekend, he recently had a live show where it was just like open for Q&A. So yeah, I really want to contact him and see about him being a guest because he like gets it. And he, it's not, it's, this is like a real, I don't know, I don't know if I should say passion, but I mean, he is really dedicated and committed to helping teachers and families and students learn about themselves, accept themselves, strategies that we can use, if there are some skills that they need to develop. But yeah, his values and his, basic beliefs are so wonderful. Yeah, he's really good to hear. I love him. Norman Koontz, yes, recently said that language and perceptions evolve, and that's okay. Yeah, exactly. And I actually remember Norman back in the 80s at conferences, and Norman used Identity First Language. And I remember some of the conference, directors or whatever, would talk to Norman and say, actually, we use People First Language. And Norman was like, actually, I don't. And I don't think it had the name Identity First Language, but yeah, Norman's used that for a very long time, Identity First Language. And yeah, and that's the thing, right? Things evolve. Thank goodness our language evolves, so we're still not using the R word. Yes, Cass is saying how much she loves them too. Another good OT accounts are the deaf autistic OT and the occupational therapists. Yeah, I've seen the occupational therapist, but not the deaf autistic OT. So good. Look at all the wonderful resources you guys are showing. Yes. Oh, and we even have someone here from NeuroWild that loves getting the shout out. So yeah, if you want to put your link in here so people have the direct link for your group, that would be great. Cass says check out NeuroBears and SEA Bridges related to curriculum for young autistic kids. And here's another one, Autistic Teach. All right, Tiffany, thank you, ma'am. Well, you guys are great. And this is, like I said, the kind of interaction that I think is really helpful so we can have more conversations and really understand and, not question what people prefer, however, to be respectful and honor what they prefer. And so, yeah, this has been very helpful. And I thank you for being here. Let's see. Okay. Also check out homeopathic supplements. Yeah, I was talking about, I used to go to a chiropractor that would use homeopathics, and I haven't found anybody since I moved. But that's, I think, a really good alternative to Western medicine. Charmaine, where will you be posting all of these great resources? So they'll come out in my email, Rochelle, and I'm pretty sure you get my emails. If you don't get my emails, you can go to iep.today /weekly adv tips. And I try and have the emails go out on Tuesday mornings. So that's where you can find that. Let me take that down. So, yeah. Yes. Lives in the Balance, which is Dr. Ross Green's organization, is amazing with behavior strategies for autistic kids. Yeah, and a few years ago, I had Dr. Green on my show as a guest, and yeah, I'm definitely a fan. And just all of the things that we're learning more about the brain. One, that they are neuroplastic and can change, and learning that behaviors that in the past people have labeled and considered as non-compliant can really be, there's a different underlying cause for that a lot of times, and it's not a matter of compliance. And it's very exciting to think that more families and teachers are learning about co-regulation. There's so much practical information out there that families and teachers can use that really makes a huge difference. So, I feel, the field has been, it's not like it just came into existence, as far as neuroscience, but it seems like it's on that cusp of becoming more, well known and people understanding it more. So I think that's really helped us. So another place is cold low light laser therapy. Oh, to use that. Can you say more about that? I don't know anything about that. And I think what we want to do is make sure that we're using things that are going to be helpful, that our kids have choices on, what gets used, and making sure that we're sensitive to, just upholding those values that the individual has. So this has been such a good discussion. I'm glad I decided to do this as a topic. It was like, oh, I think this is, passe. People know about this. But I don't know everything either, which I've always known. And so, so these kind of open forums are really helpful. I'll be doing a live show on this Facebook page the second and the fourth Thursdays of the month. So I hope that you'll be a regular viewer and participant, because we learn when you're here and we learn when you share with us. So thank you so much. And let's close up with a couple more comments. Tiffany says, we are in the process of teaching my youngest son, Spencer, who is unreliably speaking, how to use a letterboard to communicate. We're working with a provider in Portland, Oregon, doing spelling to communicate. Yeah, Tiffany, I think I've seen some of your posts. And the other thing, and I'll make myself a note, is in the newsletter. I'll give you the link. Tiffany, I don't know if you saw a live show I did a few months ago with Otto Lana from the San Diego area, but he's also a speller. And so I'll put that link in the newsletter, because that was like a really insightful visit with Otto. So yeah, or you can look him up, Otto Lana. He has a website that's called Otto Types. He's really pretty cool. Trisha, I have heard more than ever that parents don't want my children in their classes because they are distracting. Honestly, peers are more accepting and capable than some parents think. Oh, exactly. It's like, is this a parent problem or a student problem? Yeah. So see, those prejudices and that need for some parents to want to still have our kids separated, right? Lots of things we need to change. Rochelle says this wasn't passe at all. Good. Tiffany says, thank you. You're welcome, Tiffany. I haven't seen you in a long time. Cass said, we started my now 3-year-old with HighTech AAC at age 2, and it has changed our whole lives. I'd be happy to talk toddler AAC with you sometime. Yeah. And that does open up a whole world, right? I mean, for Dylan, we waited late. I don't think we started using sign language with him until he was like more than a year old. And he really picked up on the sign language. Um, and, a lot of it was like sign approximations. But then before he went to kindergarten, he used a Dynavox, which was like a very big, clunky machine back in the 90s. And Dylan used a Dynavox for a couple of years, and that was really helpful. So yeah, the alternative augmentative communication, not only the devices, but the services that the school can provide around that. One of the biggest things that I see as an advocate is that too many AAC devices are like on a shelf in the back of the room or in a closet in the special ed room. So accessibility and having people understand this is the child's voice. You don't like take your voice and go put it on a shelf for a while or lock it up in a closet, right? It's the person's voice. And for some people, and it would be interesting, Tiffany, you know, to see, like, I know a lot of families go through different, is it going to be sign language? Is it going to be a device? Is it going to be spelling? So there are different options. And sometimes it just takes that experimentation to see which is the right one that's really going to click for your child. So it's very exciting because without communication, I mean, a reliable way that you can communicate with others. I mean, I just can't imagine what life would be without that, right? It's like, so Rochelle remembers Kathy Snow's son Benjamin wrote a thesis for college, something along the lines of you don't need to hold a pencil to go to college. Yeah, I could look for that on Kathy's website. Yes, Benjamin is a wonderful young adult. Well, not even, maybe he's not that young anymore. He's in his 30s. If you're in your 30s, I don't know if you're a young adult. But yeah, Benjamin is also a really insightful person. And that's, that's one of those things, right? We make so many judgments about people. If they don't have this skill, they can't do this, which is totally incorrect, right? Yeah. And Tiffany says that starts from the top down, just saying, yeah. Cass says they use Proloquo to go. We did not go through the district. We went through private evaluation, prescription, and insurance using a company called AbleNet. And we ended up paying very little in the end. Have control of it at home versus control being in the district's hands changes many, many things. Yeah. And sometimes, what I found is there's not that many people at school that are trained in how to like input new vocabulary or anything in the device. So many times that responsibility gets shifted to the parent doing it. So yeah. And the other thing, I have a friend, Cindy, in Colorado. And one of the things I loved and still love about Cindy and programming her son's communication device is like, she is real. It's like, no, get out of my face. I mean, that could be one of the things on your child's device, right? And that communication of, not just like the science vocabulary and those kinds of things, but the real conversational communication that kids use. And also, changing that as they get older. There's new words, right? We evolve with our language to have our kids have whatever those new words are that kids are using. Make sure that things like that are programmed into their communication device too, right? I don't know. So Let's see. Cass says, you are very right. But if the child comes with a device as a given, they have to figure it out in the IEP. Yeah. And that's where, and like for us, when Dylan was first using the Dynavox, is like I made sure that it was written in the IEP that as family members, we would get training in how to use the machine at the same time that the staff was getting trained. So usually you'll, have like a company rep, or it might be an SLP in your district, somebody on the, assistive technology team that will do the training. So you really want to make sure that training gets written in the IEP, the frequency of it, the ongoing aspect of it, because it's not just like a one-time, here's how we do it. Good luck. We'll see you later. And then to also incorporate in the IEP that the parent gets training. And I really like, if at all possible, for those things to happen at the same time. So everybody hears the same language, the same directions, the same, important things to remember. And that doesn't always work. So an option is, as a parent, you could ask for the teacher training to be videotaped, or if it's on Zoom, and get a recording of it. And things like that help, because then you can go back and rewatch it. But yeah, it's not just, the devices, but it's also those services and the training that needs to be looked at. So, we are a little bit past the top of the hour. If you are in our community connecting for change, we have a meetup discussion coming up in just about, 10-12 minutes. So if you are in our Connecting for Change group, go over to that Facebook group, and we'll see you soon to be talking about some favorite topics over there. I appreciate you guys being with us live. I appreciate learning from you. And this is what it's about, right? I mean, we come together and we learn from each other. So thank you so much. And we will be in touch. So take care.